Dr. Elena Martinez pressed her face against the cold metal window of the observation deck. The stars looked different here in the Vega system, brighter somehow. She had been living on the Kepler research station for 2 years now, studying the peaceful Zalathi people who lived on the blue-green world below. The station floated in space like a metal flower, its rotating arms creating artificial gravity for the crew of 30 humans and 12 Zalathi researchers. Elena loved working here. The Zalathi were gentle creatures who looked like walking dolphins with long, graceful arms. They spent their days writing poetry and solving mathematical puzzles that made human scientists scratch their heads in wonder. Elena was checking her morning reports when the alarm started screaming. Red lights flashed throughout the station as Commander Jake Sullivan's voice boomed over the speakers. All hands to emergency stations. Unknown vessels approaching the system. Elena ran to the main observation deck where a crowd had already gathered. Through the massive viewing window, she could see them coming. Dark shapes moving against the stars like hungry shadows. The ships were enormous, bigger than anything she had ever seen. They looked like giant crystals, all sharp edges and gleaming surfaces that caught the light of Vega's dying sun. "Sweet Jesus," whispered Dr. Pete Johnson, the station's chief engineer. "How many are there?" Jake Sullivan appeared beside them, his face pale. "Our sensors count over 500 ships. They're not responding to our communication attempts." Elena felt her stomach drop. 500 ships was more than the entire Terran Defense Force, more than most galactic civilizations could field in a single battle. Below them, the Zalathi homeworld continued its peaceful rotation, completely unaware of the danger approaching. Elena could see the great cities beneath the ocean surface, their bioluminescent lights twinkling like underwater stars. Millions of Zalathi lived down there, creating art and sharing stories, completely defenseless. The crystal ships moved into orbit around the planet like a deadly necklace. Then they began to change. The smooth surfaces opened up like flower petals, revealing massive mining equipment and harvesting beams that glowed with hungry energy. "Oh no," Elena whispered. "They're devourers." Everyone on the observation deck turned to stare at her. The devourers were a legend, a nightmare story that spacers told in bars across the galaxy. A nomadic species that traveled from world to world, stripping away everything useful and leaving behind lifeless rocks. "Are you sure?" Jake asked, his voice tight with fear. Elena nodded, pointing at the ships as they began their terrible work. Beams of energy reached down from the crystal vessels, touching the planet's surface. Where the beams landed, the ground simply disappeared, sucked up into the ships like water through a straw. Jake activated the emergency communication system, broadcasting on every frequency the station could reach. "This is Kepler Research Station to any vessel in range. We have a code black emergency in the Vega system. Planet Zalathi Prime is under attack by unknown hostiles, requesting immediate assistance." The first response came from Ambassador Kethari, the Zalathi representative aboard the station. The dolphin-like creature's normally musical voice shook with terror as he activated the Cosmic Council's emergency network. "Great civilizations of the galaxy," Kethari's voice echoed across space through the quantum communication system. "This is Ambassador Kethari of the Zalathi people. Our world is under attack. We are a peaceful species with no weapons, no military. We have given the galaxy our poetry, our mathematics, our friendship. Please, we beg for your help. Do not let our people die." Elena watched the communication board as Jake sent the distress call to every major civilization in known space. The Thorian Empire with their massive warships, the Collective of Minds with their advanced technology, the Benevolent Assembly who claimed to protect peaceful worlds. Surely someone would come. Someone had to come. Hours passed. The Devourer ships continued their horrible work, carving away pieces of the Zalathi homeworld. Elena could see the scars forming on the planet's surface, great wounds where forests and cities used to be. The first reply came from the Thorian Empire. Elena's heart jumped with hope until she heard the message. "Kepler Research Station, this is Admiral Vorthak of the Thorian Imperial Fleet. The Vega system falls outside our established territorial boundaries. The Thorian Empire cannot commit military assets to this engagement. We wish you well in resolving this matter. Elena stared at the communication screen in disbelief. Outside their boundaries? Since when do the Thorians care about boundaries when there's a fight to be had? More replies trickled in, each one crushing Elena's hope a little more. The collective of minds declared the situation economically unfeasible to address. The Silicon Republic claimed their ships were committed to other operations. Even the Benevolent Assembly, who built their entire reputation on protecting innocent worlds, voted to monitor the situation and provide humanitarian aid after the conflict. Concludes. Jake slammed his fist against the communication console. Cowards, every last one of them. Elena felt tears running down her face as she watched the destruction below. Entire continents were disappearing into the Devourer ships. The beautiful, underwater cities were being torn apart, their lights going dark one by one. Ambassador Keith Hari stood beside her, his large eyes reflecting the red emergency lights. Perhaps this is how the universe ends for my people, he said quietly. Not with great battles or noble sacrifice, but simply forgotten by those who could have helped. For 3 days, the calls for help echoed across the galaxy. For 3 days, the great civilizations of known space found excuses to look the other way. Elena stopped sleeping, stopped eating, just stood at the window watching the Devourer ships tear her adopted world apart. On the 4th day, when hope seemed completely lost, something impossible happened. A new voice crackled through the communication system. It was speaking English, which surprised Elena so much that she nearly dropped her coffee cup. Kepler Research Station, this is Fleet Admiral Lisa Parker of the Terran Defense Force. We have received your distress call regarding the situation in the Vega system. Elena's heart stopped. Earth? Humanity was responding? Please be advised. Admiral Parker's voice continued calm and professional, that the Terran Defense Force is mobilizing a relief fleet. We understand the Zalathi people are in immediate danger, and we are prepared to render all possible assistance. Jake grabbed the microphone with shaking hands. Admiral Parker, this is Commander Sullivan. Are you sure about this? Our scouts count over 500 enemy vessels. They're Devourers, Admiral. This isn't some border skirmish. There was a pause. Then Admiral Parker's voice came back, and Elena could hear something in it that none of the other galactic powers had shown. Determination. Commander Sullivan, humanity hears you. We hear the Zalathi people, and we're coming. Elena sank into a chair, overwhelmed by a mixture of relief and terror. Humanity was coming to help. But what could they possibly do against 500 Devourer ships? The entire human fleet was maybe 50 vessels, and most of those were exploration ships, not warships. Ambassador Keith Hari placed a gentle hand on Elena's shoulder. Your people, he said softly. They are coming to die for us. Elena looked out at the Devourer ships, still methodically consuming the Zalathi homeworld. She thought about Earth, about the small blue planet where she had grown up. Humanity had barely mastered interstellar travel. They were new to the galaxy, weak compared to the ancient civilizations that had refused to help. But they were coming, anyway. Yeah, Elena whispered, watching the stars. That's what we do. The distress call had gone out to the entire galaxy. Only humanity had answered. The emergency session of the World Council had been going on for 6 hours. President Robert Hayes sat at the head of the massive oval table, watching representatives from every nation on Earth argue about humanity's response to the crisis in the Vega system. The holographic display in the center of the room showed the grim reality. 500 Devourer ships were systematically destroying the Zalathi homeworld. Every few minutes, another section of the planet would simply vanish, consumed by the alien mining beams. General Patricia Cole stood at the podium, her uniform crisp despite the late hour. She had flown directly from the Terran Defense Force headquarters, and her presentation was brutal in its honesty. Ladies and gentlemen, let me be clear about our situation, she said, gesturing to the tactical display. The Terran Defense Force currently has 47 combat vessels in active service. Of those, only 23 are battlecruisers capable of deep space combat operations. Senator Danny Clark from the North American Federation leaned forward. General, what are you saying exactly? I'm saying that if we commit our entire fleet to this operation, we will lose. The mathematics are simple. 500 enemy ships against our entire navy would result in the complete destruction of human military capability. The room erupted in angry voices. Representatives shouted across the table in a dozen different languages. President Hayes banged his gavel until the noise died down. Dr. Amanda Foster, head of the Xenological Institute, raised her hand. She was a small woman with gray hair and kind eyes, but when she spoke, everyone listened. Mr. President, I've been studying the Galactic response to this crisis for the past 3 days. Do you know what I've learned? She paused, looking around the room. Every major civilization in known space has found an excuse not to help. The Thorians claim territorial issues. The Collective talks about economic feasibility. The Benevolent Assembly wants to monitor the situation. What's your point, Doctor? Asked Representative Liu Wei from the Asian Alliance. My point is that this moment will define humanity's place in the galaxy for generations to come. Are we going to be the species that stands up for what's right? Or are we going to be just another voice in the crowd making excuses while innocent people die? Senator Clark stood up, his face red with anger. Dr. Foster, with all due respect, we have a responsibility to our own people first. Earth barely survived the resource wars 20 years ago. We can't risk everything for aliens we barely know. Those aliens sent us their poetry, Dr. Foster replied quietly. They shared their mathematical discoveries with us. They welcomed human researchers to their world, and now they're dying while we debate. President Hayes rubbed his tired eyes. The weight of the decision was crushing. If he sent the fleet and they were destroyed, Earth would be defenseless. But if he did nothing, how could he look at himself in the mirror? Far above Earth, in the depths of space, Captain Steve Rogers received his sealed orders aboard the UES Defiance. His small fleet of 12 ships represented the fastest vessels in the human navy. They weren't the biggest or the strongest, but they could reach the Vega system in 4 days. Rogers broke the seal and read the preliminary orders. His tactical officer, Lieutenant Commander Nancy Davis, watched his face carefully. Bad news, Captain? She asked. Rogers handed her the data pad. We're being asked to take our squadron to Vega. Reconnaissance mission, officially. Nancy read the orders and felt her stomach sink. Reconnaissance against 500 Devourer ships? Sir, this is a suicide mission. I know. Rogers looked out at the stars through the bridge windows. But someone has to go. Someone has to try. Nancy ran to her computer station and began running tactical simulations. She was the best strategic mind in the fleet, able to calculate battle outcomes with frightening accuracy. But every simulation she ran ended the same way. Captain, I've run 50 different scenarios. Even if we combine our squadron with the entire home fleet, we lose every single time. The best outcome gives us a 12% survival rate. Rogers nodded slowly. What about the Zelathi? Sir? In your simulations, what happens to the Zelathi people? Nancy looked at her screens again. In every scenario where we don't intervene, they become extinct within 72 hours. If we do intervene and somehow delay the Devourers, we might buy them an extra day or two. Rogers sat in his captain's chair and closed his eyes. He thought about his daughter back on Earth, only 8 years old. If he died in the Vega system, she would grow up without a father. He thought about his crew, 23 good people who trusted him to bring them home. But then he thought about the Zelathi, poetry that Dr. Foster had shared with the fleet. Beautiful, haunting verses about swimming in starlight and dreaming of peace among the stars. Those poets were dying right now while the galaxy watched and did nothing. Back on Earth, the World Council debate raged on. President Hayes had listened to arguments for hours. The military advisors all agreed that intervention was impossible. The economic advisors warned that losing the fleet would bankrupt Earth's defense budget for decades. But Dr. Foster kept coming back to the same point. Mr. President, when the history books are written, how do we want to be remembered? As the species that calculated the odds and decided it wasn't worth the risk? Or as the species that stood up and said, "Not on our watch"? Fleet Admiral Lisa Parker appeared on the main screen via video link from the orbital defense platform. She looked tired but determined. "Mr. President, I've been reviewing our fleet readiness. If we strip every ship from patrol duty, every vessel from training missions, we can put together a force of 41 combat ships." "Admiral, General Cole's briefing was quite clear about our chances," President Hayes said. "Yes, sir, it was. But there's something the General didn't mention in her briefing." Admiral Parker paused. "The Devourers have never fought humans before. They've never encountered our tactics, our weapons, or our stubborn refusal to follow the rules." General Cole frowned. "Admiral, what exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that every species in the galaxy fights the same way. Big fleets, formation combat, overwhelming technological superiority. The Devourers have adapted to that kind of warfare over thousands of years." "And humans fight differently?" Senator Clark asked. Admiral Parker smiled grimly. "Senator, humans wrote the book on irregular warfare. We've been fighting impossible odds since we climbed down from the trees. The Devourers expect their enemies to behave rationally, to retreat when the odds are hopeless." "You're talking about sacrificing our entire fleet," Representative Liu Wei said. "No, sir. I'm talking about teaching the galaxy what humans do when someone calls for help." President Hayes looked around the room at the faces of Earth's representatives. He saw fear, anger, calculation, and hope all mixed together. These people had been elected to make the hard decisions, to protect humanity's interests. But sometimes protecting humanity's interest meant protecting humanity's soul. "Admiral Parker, how long would you need to prepare the fleet?" 18 hours, Mr. President. We can have every available ship ready for hyperspace jump." President Hayes stood up. The room fell silent, waiting for his decision. "Ladies and gentlemen, 48 hours ago, a peaceful species asked the galaxy for help. Every major civilization found a reason to say no. Every advanced species decided that the Zalathi weren't worth the risk." He paused, looking at each representative. "But we're not like them. Humanity has always been the species that runs toward trouble instead of away from it. We're the ones who help first and ask questions later. If we abandon that now, we stop being human." The vote was close. 27 in favor, 21 against, with 4 abstentions. But it was enough. Admiral Parker received the authorization code 90 minutes later. Within 18 hours, 41 human warships gathered at the edge of Earth's solar system. It was the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled, and it was heading into certain destruction. Captain Rogers looked at his crew as they prepared for the hyperspace jump. These brave men and women were about to risk everything for people they had never met, on a world most of them couldn't even find on a star chart. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rogers said over the ship's communication system, "in a few minutes we're going to jump to a system where we'll be outnumbered 12 to 1 by an enemy that has never been defeated. The odds are against us. Hell, the odds are laughing at us." He paused, looking out at the other ships in the fleet. "But there's something those Devourers don't know about humans. We don't fight because we think we can win. We fight because it's the right thing to do. Today we're going to show the galaxy what that looks like." The fleet jumped to hyperspace, leaving Earth's defenses dangerously thin. Across the galaxy, other species watched the human response with amazement and disbelief. The young, weak humans were actually going to try to fight 500 Devourer ships. It was impossible. It was insane. It was perfectly, undeniably human. Elena Martinez had not slept in 36 hours. She stood at the observation window of Kepler Research Station, watching the Zalathi homeworld slowly die. Half the planet was gone now, carved away by the relentless Devourer mining beams. The beautiful blue oceans had turned dark and ugly. The underwater cities that had glowed like jewels were nothing but empty craters. Ambassador Kethari floated beside her in his mobility suit, designed to let the aquatic Zalathi move around in the station's atmosphere. His normally bright skin had turned a dull gray color, which Elena had learned meant deep sadness. My family lived in the southern hemisphere, he said quietly, his voice making soft musical sounds. They were artists. They painted with bioluminescent algae, creating pictures that would glow and change over time. Elena looked at the tactical display. The southern hemisphere of the Zalathi world was completely gone. I'm sorry, she whispered, not knowing what else to say. The Devourer ships continued their work like giant mechanical insects. They had settled into a rhythm, systematically stripping away layers of the planet's surface. Elena estimated they would be finished in another 12 hours. Then they would leave, and the Zalathi civilization would be nothing but empty space and scattered debris. Commander Jake Sullivan walked over to them, his face exhausted. Any word from the human fleet? They should arrive within the hour, Elena said, checking her chronometer. If they haven't been destroyed already. Jake nodded grimly. 4 days ago, they had received confirmation that the human fleet was on its way. 41 ships against 500. Everyone on the station knew it was hopeless, but nobody said it out loud anymore. The Devourers had ignored the research station completely. Elena supposed they didn't consider 30 humans and 12 Zalathi worth the ammunition. The station was too small to have anything valuable, and the aliens seemed focused on the planet below. Contact from the outer sensor array, called Lieutenant Beth Palmer from the communication station. I'm picking up hyperspace exit signatures at the edge of the system. Elena felt her heart jump. How many ships? Sensors show. Wait, this can't be right. Beth recalibrated her equipment. I'm reading 41 vessels, all broadcasting human identification codes. The observation deck fell silent. Elena pressed her face against the window, straining to see any sign of the approaching fleet. For a moment, nothing happened. Then space itself seemed to tear apart in brilliant flashes of blue light. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation. Even at this distance, Elena could see they were much smaller than the Devourer ships. The human vessels looked like metal needles compared to the massive crystal monsters that surrounded the dying planet. Captain Rogers' voice crackled across all communication frequencies, clear and strong. This is Captain Steve Rogers of the Terran Defense Force commanding the relief fleet. Attention Devourer vessels, you are attacking a sovereign world under the protection of the human species. Stand down immediately and withdraw from this system. The response came 30 seconds later, but not in words. Every Devourer ship in orbit suddenly turned toward the approaching human fleet. Energy beams that had been carving up the planet, now focused on the newcomers. The space around the human ships lit up with deadly fire. Elena held her breath, expecting to see the human fleet destroyed in the first volley. Instead, something amazing happened. The human ships scattered like birds breaking formation and diving in different directions. The massive energy beams that should have vaporized them struck empty space. All ships engage at will, Roger's voice commanded. Show them what humans do to bullies. What happened next defied everything Elena knew about space combat. She had studied military tactics as part of her xenology training. Every advanced species fought the same way. Large ships in formation, overwhelming firepower, technological superiority. It was logical, efficient, and predictable. The humans threw logic out the window. Commander Lisa Grant aboard the UES Yorktown led her squadron in a suicidal charge directly into the heart of the Devourer formation. Elena watched in horror as the small human ship dove between two massive enemy vessels, so close that she could see the crystal surfaces of their hulls. The Devourers turned their weapons inward, trying to target the Yorktown, but they were too big and too close together. Their own fire began hitting each other. Grant emerged from the formation with her ship's hull scarred and burning, but 3 Devourer vessels exploded behind her. Impossible, whispered Dr. Pete Johnson. She just used their size against them. Captain Alan Ross tried a different approach. His ship, the UES Constitution, was badly damaged from the first exchange of fire. Instead of retreating, he flew directly into the debris field from a destroyed Devourer vessel. Elena lost sight of him completely as his ship disappeared into the wreckage. He's hiding, Jake realized. using the debris as cover. For 10 minutes, the Constitution stayed hidden. The Devourers searched for him, sending probe ships into the debris field. Then Ross emerged suddenly, his ship patched with pieces of alien metal and firing every weapon he had. He destroyed 2 probe ships and damaged a third before diving back into cover. Engineer Chief Betty Hughes aboard the UES Liberty pulled off the most insane stunt Elena had ever seen. When her ship took critical damage to the hull, instead of abandoning the fight, Hughes suited up and went outside. Elena watched through the tactical display as the small figure of the chief engineer literally welded hull breaches shut while enemy fire lit up the space around her. "She's repairing the ship during battle," Elena said in amazement. "In the middle of a firefight, she's actually fixing the hull." The Devourers, who had conquered hundreds of worlds over thousands of years, found themselves fighting an enemy unlike anything in their experience. Human ships that should have been destroyed kept fighting. Crews abandoned damaged vessels only to be picked up by other ships and thrown back into battle. Captains performed maneuvers that violated basic physics, using gravity wells and debris fields in ways that no sane pilot would attempt. Elena began to understand what Admiral Parker had meant about humans fighting differently. The Devourers expected their enemies to be rational, to retreat when overwhelmed, to fight with honor and discipline. Humans fought like cornered animals. Captain Jerry Adams in the UES Intrepid rammed his crippled ship directly into a Devourer command vessel when his weapons failed. Instead of trying to escape, he set his ship's reactor to overload and took out 2 enemy ships in the explosion. Lieutenant Susan Moore led a boarding party onto a damaged Devourer vessel, fighting through crystalline corridors with nothing but plasma rifles and determination. They captured the ship's navigation computer before fighting their way back to their own vessel. The battle raged for hours. Elena watched human ships die one by one, but each death cost the Devourers dearly. The mathematical certainty of human defeat began to look less certain. "They're actually hurting them," Ambassador Kethari said wonderingly. "Your people are actually making them bleed." Elena nodded, tears streaming down her face. The human fleet was being torn apart, but they were taking the Devourers with them. Ships that should have been scrap metal continued fighting. Crews that should have surrendered kept finding new ways to hit back. By hour 12, the human fleet was down to 19 ships. But the Devourer fleet had lost over 200 vessels to humanity's relentless, impossible assault. Something else was happening too. Elena noticed new ships arriving at the edge of the system. A Thorian heavy cruiser appeared, its commander claiming navigation error over the radio. A squadron of collective fighters joined the battle, their pilots insisting they were conducting training exercises. These weren't official reinforcements. These were individual captains who couldn't stomach what their governments had done. They came one by one, drawn by something they saw in the human fleet's desperate fight. But they followed humanity's lead. The humans, bloodied but unbroken, had become the center around which the galaxy's conscience was finally gathering. Elena watched Captain Rogers' flagship, the UES Defiance, burning with internal fires as it continued to coordinate the battle. Half the human fleet was gone, but the remainder fought on with a fury that seemed to inspire every ship that joined them. The Devourers, for the first time in their history, began to retreat. Captain Steve Rogers gripped the armrests of his command chair as another explosion rocked the UES Defiance. Smoke filled the bridge, and sparks flew from damaged control panels. Half his crew was dead or wounded, but they kept fighting. "Hull breach on Deck 7, reported Lieutenant Sarah Kim, her voice steady despite the blood running down her face. "Emergency teams are sealing it now." Rogers looked at the tactical display. After 16 hours of continuous battle, only 19 human ships remained, but the Devourer fleet had been cut down to less than 300 vessels. The impossible was happening. Humanity was actually winning. "Captain," called Commander Frank Johnson over the radio from the UES Phoenix, "I've got a crazy idea, but it might work." "At this point, crazy is all we have left," Rogers replied. "What do you need?" "That damaged Devourer ship we disabled an hour ago. I want to board it and see if we can learn something useful." Rogers almost said no. Boarding actions were suicide missions against the Devourers, The crystalline aliens fought like demons when cornered, and their ships were death traps of sharp edges and toxic atmosphere. But Frank Johnson was the best close combat specialist in the fleet. If anyone could pull it off, he could. "Do it," Rogers ordered. "Take your Marine squad and whatever you need." Elena Martinez watched from the research station as a small human shuttle detached from the UES Phoenix and headed toward the crippled Devourer vessel. The alien ship was 3 times the size of any human vessel, its crystal hull cracked and leaking atmosphere. "They're actually going inside that thing," Dr. Pete Johnson said in amazement. "Those people are completely insane." Ambassador Keth Hari floated beside them, his large eyes fixed on the battle. "No," he said softly. "They are not insane. They are doing what my people could not do. They are refusing to give up." The shuttle disappeared into the Devourer ship through a damaged port. For 20 minutes, there was silence. Then, Frank Johnson's voice came over the radio, crackling with static. "This is Johnson to all ships. You're not going to believe what we found in here." The boarding party had fought their way through corridors that looked like the inside of a giant crystal cave. The Devourers they encountered were even more frightening up close, 10 feet tall with bodies like living glass and claws that could cut through metal. But Johnson's Marines were tougher than the aliens expected. They fought with plasma rifles and explosive charges blasting their way to the ship's central core. What they found there changed everything. Dr. Amy Taylor, the fleet's xenotechnician, was part of Johnson's boarding party. She had volunteered despite having no military training, insisting that they needed a scientist to understand whatever they found. "Captain Rogers, this is Dr. Taylor," she called over the radio, her voice excited. "The Devourer ships don't just harvest materials. They harvest energy. Everything they take from a planet gets converted into power and stored in massive batteries." "What are you saying, Doctor?" Rogers asked. "I'm saying their greatest strength might be their greatest weakness. These energy storage systems are incredibly powerful, but they're not well protected. If we could overload them somehow." Amy worked frantically with her portable computer, trying to understand the alien technology. The Devourer ship's energy core was like nothing she had ever seen. A swirling mass of captured starlight and planetary matter, all converted into pure power. "I think I can create a feedback loop," she said. "If we can get access to their main power grid, we might be able to turn their own energy weapons against them." Johnson and his Marines held off attacking Devourers while Amy worked. The crystalline aliens were relentless, throwing themselves at the human intruders with no regard for their own safety. But the Marines had something the Devourers didn't. Expect teamwork. Where the aliens fought as individuals, the humans moved like a single organism. They covered each other, shared ammunition, and coordinated their attacks with deadly precision. When Private Mike Chen was wounded, Corporal Lisa White dragged him to safety while the others provided covering fire. "Got it," Amy announced suddenly. "I've isolated their power distribution network. If we can plant charges at 3 specific points, the feedback should cascade through their entire fleet." "How big an explosion are we talking about?" Johnson asked. Amy looked at her calculations and went pale. "Big enough to take out every Devourer ship in the system, including us if we're too close." Meanwhile, something unprecedented was happening in the space around the dying Zalathi world. More ships kept arriving. Not official fleets, but individual vessels whose crews had decided they couldn't watch the slaughter anymore. A benevolent assembly cruiser appeared, its captain claiming he had misunderstood his orders. 3 collective destroyers joined the fight, their commanders insisting they were providing technical assistance. Even a massive Thorian battleship showed up, its crew pretending they were lost and looking for directions. But all these new arrivals followed the human fleet's lead. They adopted the same crazy tactics, the same refusal to retreat, the same willingness to sacrifice everything for strangers they had never met. Elena watched in amazement as the combined fleet began to coordinate their attacks. The humans had become the heart of something larger, a gathering of every species' best instincts, drawn together by humanity's simple refusal to abandon the innocent. "Captain Rogers," Amy Taylor called, from inside the Devourer ship. "We're ready to set the charges, but someone needs to manually trigger the sequence. The feedback won't start automatically." Rogers understood immediately. Someone would have to stay behind to activate the device. It was a suicide mission. "I'll do it," Frank Johnson volunteered without hesitation. "No," Amy said firmly. "This is my plan. I understand the technology. It has to be me." The argument that followed was interrupted by a new voice. Captain Jerry Adams, whose ship had been destroyed earlier in the battle, had somehow survived and made it to the boarding shuttle. "With respect, Doctor, you're both wrong," he said. "I'm already supposed to be dead. My ship is gone. My crew is gone. This is what I've got left to give." Rogers felt his throat tighten. These people, his people, were volunteering to die so that others might live. It was the most human thing he had ever witnessed. "Jerry, are you sure about this?" "Captain, my grandfather fought in World War III. Before he died, he told me something I've never forgotten. He said that some things are worth dying for, but the best things are worth living for. Today, we're fighting for both." The boarding party evacuated the Devourer ship, leaving Captain Adams alone with the device Amy had built. His voice came over the radio one last time. "All ships, this is Adams. Get as far away from the Devourer fleet as possible. This is going to be a big one." Elena watched from the research station as every human ship and their alien allies pulled back to a safe distance. The Devourer fleet, sensing victory, pressed their attack. They had no idea what was about to happen. "Feedback sequence initiated," Adams reported. "Energy cascade beginning in 3, 2, 1. The first Devourer ship exploded in a flash of brilliant light. Then the explosion jumped to the next ship and the next, like dominoes falling in a chain reaction. The feedback loop spread through the entire enemy fleet as their own harvested energy turned against them. In less than 60 seconds, 300 Devourer ships were destroyed by their own power systems. The space around the Zalathi world lit up like a new star as thousands of years of accumulated energy was released at once. When the light faded, the Devourer fleet was gone. Only empty space remained where the crystal ships had been. Elena stared out the window in shock. They did it. The humans actually did it. Ambassador Kethari made a sound that might have been laughter or crying. "My people will survive. Our children will grow up because humans decided we were worth saving." Captain Rogers' voice came over the communication system, exhausted but victorious. "All ships, this is Rogers. The Devourer threat has been eliminated. Begin search and rescue operations for survivors." The battle was over. Against impossible odds, with tactics that made no sense, humanity had won. They had saved a world they barely knew, protected people they had never met, and shown the galaxy what courage really looked like. But the victory had come at a terrible cost. 22 human ships were gone forever, along with thousands of brave men and women who had died far from home. Elena looked down at the scarred surface of the Zalathi world. The planet would heal, given time. The Zalathi would rebuild their cities and write new poetry about the day strangers came from the stars to save them. And across the galaxy, the word was already spreading. When the impossible happened, when hope seemed lost, humanity had answered the call. The age of human leadership in the galaxy had begun. 3 weeks after the battle, Elena Martinez stood on the surface of the Zalathi homeworld for the first time. The gravity was lighter than Earth's, and she had to wear a breathing mask because the atmosphere was too rich in oxygen for human lungs. Around her, the landscape told the story of what had happened. Great scars crossed the continents where the Devourer mining beams had carved away entire cities. The beautiful coral forests that once covered the land were gone, replaced by ugly brown dirt and scattered debris. But there were signs of hope too. Elena watched human medics working alongside Zalathi healers, treating the wounded in temporary hospitals made from cargo containers. Human engineers helped Zalathi builders plan new cities to replace the ones that had been destroyed. "Ambassador," Kethari approached her, moving slowly in the mechanical suit that helped him breathe air instead of water. His skin had regained some of its natural blue-green color, though Elena could see the sadness still there in his large eyes. "Dr. Martinez," he said, his voice making soft musical sounds through the translator. "I wanted you to see this." He handed her a small crystal tablet covered in flowing Zalathi writing. Elena's translator device worked for a moment, then displayed the text in English. It's a poem, she realized. About the battle. Not just about the battle, Kethari corrected. About hope. About the day strangers came from across the galaxy to save people they had never met. Elena read the poem slowly. It talked about ships of metal and hearts of fire, about warriors who fought impossible odds because it was the right thing to do. But what struck her most was the ending, which spoke of a debt that could never be repaid and a friendship that would last forever. Ambassador, you don't owe us anything, Elena said. We did what anyone should have done. Kethari made a sound that might have been laughter. Dr. Martinez, that is exactly why the galaxy will never be the same. You say anyone should have done this thing, but no one else did. Only humans. Across the galaxy, the news of humanity's victory had spread like wildfire. The species that had once dismissed humans as weak and primitive now watched Earth with new respect and fear. In the halls of the Thorian Empire, Admiral Vorthak stared at tactical reports that made no sense. How had 41 primitive human ships destroyed a devourer fleet that could have conquered the Thorian homeworld? They used our own tactics against us, his aide explained. Unpredictable movement, desperate courage, willingness to sacrifice everything for victory. Vorthak snorted. Madness. No civilized species fights that way. With respect, Admiral, maybe that's why they won and we stayed home. The collective of minds was having similar conversations. Their perfect logical calculations had predicted human defeat with 99% certainty. The fact that humanity had won suggested their models were fundamentally flawed. Perhaps, suggested one of the collective's philosophers, there are factors we cannot calculate, things like hope and sacrifice and moral courage. The Benevolent Assembly called an emergency session to discuss the human situation. For 3 days, representatives argued about what humanity's victory meant for galactic politics. They've upset the balance of power, complained Ambassador Zelwick from the hegemony worlds. How can we maintain order if every species thinks they can solve problems with violence? But they didn't start the violence, pointed out Representative Yala from the Outer Rim. They ended it. They stopped the devourers when none of us would. President Robert Hayes received his first invitation to address the Galactic Council 2 days after the victory reports reached Earth. It was an honor that had never been extended to humanity before. Some species had been members of the Council for thousands of years. Hayes stood at the podium in the Great Assembly Hall, looking out at representatives from hundreds of worlds. Some were humanoid, others were completely alien, but they all watched him with the same expression, curiosity, mixed with respect. Honored representatives, Hayes began. 3 weeks ago, a peaceful species called for help. My species answered that call not because we expected reward, but because it was the right thing to do. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. The Thorian. Representative shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Today I announce the creation of the Terran Protection Protocol. Humanity pledges to respond to any distress call from any species, anywhere in the galaxy, regardless of the odds against us. The assembly erupted in shocked voices. Ambassador Zelwick jumped to his feet. President Hayes, surely you cannot be serious. Your species lacks the resources for such grand promises. Hayes smiled. Ambassador, you're probably right. We are small and weak compared to the great powers represented in this room. But we have something that size and strength cannot provide. And what is that? Demanded the Thorian representative. We keep our promises. The first test of the Terran Protection Protocol came only 6 weeks later. A mining colony in the Rigel system sent out a distress call. Pirates had attacked the settlement and were holding the miners hostage. The Rigel system was controlled by the hegemony, but their fleet was unavailable for immediate response. The collective's ships were committed to other operations. The Thorian Empire claimed the pirates were not a significant threat. Captain Lisa Grant, now commanding the rebuilt UES Yorktown, received her orders 12 hours after the distress call. Her small squadron of 4 ships jumped to hyperspace immediately. They arrived to find the pirates had taken over the mining station, and were threatening to space the hostages if anyone interfered. It should have been a negotiation situation, a careful diplomatic dance to avoid bloodshed. Instead, Grant did something the pirates never expected. She rammed her ship directly into their flagship, boarding it through the hole her ship made. Her Marines fought through the pirate vessel while she negotiated directly with their captain at gunpoint. The hostages were freed within 4 hours. The pirates surrendered rather than face more of the humans' insane tactics. Word spread quickly. When humans said they would respond to distress calls, they meant it. When they arrived, they didn't negotiate or calculate odds. They simply won. Elena Martinez was promoted to Earth's first xenological ambassador 6 months after the Zalathi rescue. Her job was to coordinate humanity's growing role in galactic affairs. She set up her office on the orbital platform above Earth with a view of the planet where humanity had learned to dream of stars. Her first official visitor was Ambassador Kethari, now representing the Zalathi people in all diplomatic matters. "Ambassador," Elena said, offering him a seat designed for his aquatic physiology, "what can I do for you?" "I come with a request. From my people," Kethari said. "We wish to establish a permanent alliance with humanity. Not a trade agreement or military pact, but something deeper." "What kind of alliance?" "A moral one. We want to learn to be like you. To be the kind of people who help strangers because it is right." Elena felt tears in her eyes. "Ambassador, you already are that kind of people. You just needed someone to show you it was possible." Over the following months, other species began making similar requests. Not the great powers with their massive fleets and ancient pride, but smaller civilizations who had watched humanity's example and wanted to be better. The gentle folk of Kepler 442b asked for human advisors to help them develop defensive capabilities. The crystal singers of the Veil Nebula requested human teachers to train their young in courage. Even some individual members of the great powers quietly reached out, wanting to join humanity's growing network of allies. Elena watched the star. Charts in her office changed color as more and more systems joined what the media was calling the Human Alliance. It wasn't really an empire or federation. It was something new. A gathering of species united not by conquest or economics, but by shared values. A year after the Battle of Vega, Captain Steve Rogers returned to the system for the dedication of the memorial. The Zalathi had built it on the largest remaining continent, a beautiful structure that rose from the water like a crystal flower. Elena joined him at the ceremony, along with representatives from dozens of species. They read the names of every human who had died in the battle and the names of the aliens who had joined them in their final fight. "You know what I think about sometimes?" Roger said as they watched the sunset over the scarred but healing world. "What's that, Captain?" "We came here expecting to die. All of us knew it was hopeless. But we came anyway because someone needed help." Elena nodded. "And now the whole galaxy is different because of that choice." Rogers smiled. "Maybe that's what leadership really is. Not being the strongest or the smartest, but being the one who shows up when everyone else finds excuses not to." In the great halls of the Galactic Council, the ancient powers still plotted and schemed. They commanded vast fleets and controlled important trade routes, but when worlds cried out for help, they no longer looked to the Thorian Empire or the Collective of Minds. They looked to the small blue world whose people had learned that true strength came not from size or technology, but from the courage to do what was right. The galaxy had found its conscience and it spoke with a human voice. The age of human moral leadership had begun, not through conquest, but through the simple act of answering when someone called for help.